Welcome everyone to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Chang, and joining me as always is my buddy, Rudy Tamarchio. Rudy, our boys are back in action. It's a high noon kickoff. What are you expecting?
The boys are back in town. I'm expecting a defense to come play at Hard Rock Stadium. They've had an extra week to prepare to fix some issues. So fingers crossed, I guess.
The boys are back in town. The boys are back in town.
Yeah.
We need that defense back in town. We need the defense to show up. There's been a bolo for the last 2 or 3 games with specifically our D line. Gonna excuse our secondary because we know what they are. But speaking of the secondary, I was reading an article in the Miami Herald this week, specifically citing these problems with the defense, right? And Guidry was talking about there's a major communication error that's been occurring in the past couple games with the secondary. And I was like, yo, how do you have communication errors? You just talk to your buddy. Like, and it's not like at max, maybe you're 25 yards from someone, you just scream a little bit, right? Apparently, that was not the issue. So the issue, Guidry, and I think it was Daryl Porter Jr. was also commenting on it, was basically hand signals. So they were saying that, like, I guess for different plays, different adjustments, different audibles, they have certain signals that they want to throw towards each other. And sometimes tempo will take over. Sometimes the game will move a little bit faster than what they're expecting, and they're not able to get those signals back. That's where the communication issues. Do you think the hand signals and the communication issues are going to tighten up that secondary, or do you think there's a bigger underlying problem that we're not really going to be able to fix and we just kind of got to accept?
I think there's a bigger underlying problem, but I'm not going to say that it's something that can't be fixed because I feel like it's just basic X's and O's. And Chris, you're going to hear me harp on this over and over again. We've seen it since, week 2, week 3 of the season, that just basic alignment of watching players just leaving personnel wide open, not accounted for, even in the addition. Oh, look, you know that like when an offense lines up, they're usually whatever formation they start with is not the one that they end up running at the snap of the ball. There's usually some motion
Right.
involved. There's some readjusting. They're not even taking the time to align properly defensively at the moment. So I don't think a hand signal fixes that. I think there's just a basic football mentality of, oh, there's somebody lining up at receiver. I need to go over there and look like I'm covering them, regardless of whether they go into motion or not. That's where I think there's still a big issue, and hopefully that's fixed on Saturday.
What I'm worried about, because the last time we played Wake Forest was 2013. It was actually a relatively close game, 24-21. The last time Wake Forest ever beat Miami was World War II, 1944. I'm a little worried because statistically, it's a landslide. We blow them out in almost every statistical category. But again, this is going to sound a little bit like a broken record slash deja vu because I said the same thing for the Georgia Tech game, and we all know how that turned out. So, how do we keep ourselves from repeating what happened in Atlanta in Miami Gardens this Saturday?
I'll speak to a couple of things that's beyond Miami's control, but it's a home game, which is one helpful. Two, it's likely going to be a different crew, so you don't have to worry about how the game was actually played up in Atlanta. And
Yeah.
three, I think it's just a different style of offense that they're facing, so they shouldn't have the same issues in terms of yeah, Wake Forest going to try to do the exact same thing, but Miami, figured it out towards the later half of the game against Wake Forest. It was really the offense that kind of didn't didn't help Miami climb out of that hole. So I think the thing that you could look forward to is that it's a different game. Miami is a little bit more fresh. They get some players back. We'll see how much like Damari Brown plays in this game. He should be, at least getting a few snaps. So let's see how it goes. That's why the game is played.
Yeah, I mean, we're 24-point favorites. And Wake Forest's defense is giving up about 34.7 points a game, which is pretty much our bread and butter. That's like our soft spot, our happy spot in terms of scoring points. I mean, Georgia Tech aside, that I think that was an anomaly game. I think you get one of those at least every year. You're gonna
Yep.
have an anomaly game where you really don't play to your potential. Defense aside, our defense has been bad, which is why we've just been playing catch up for the most part on offense, but our offense has been studly. Again, minus the Georgia Tech game. My thought is we've been averaging 43 points. I see us somewhere in that 35, 38, maybe even 42 point category roughly. I think we will win. I think what I'm going to be looking out for the most is what's the rotation on the D line, because I feel like there's some like Alston. I feel like I think there are other players that we haven't really seen. Maybe we can get some of these freshmen in to get some fresh legs and just to kind of push the ball. I would love to see us to stop stunting, like these shifts on the line, the crossing, just barrel down the field, go as fast as you can. The guy in front of you, push him back, and let the guys in the end set the edges, because that's something we've really been struggling to do. I don't think Wake Forest is one of these dink and dunk teams. So I'm hoping they haven't really been watching the film. I'm sure they obviously have that. It's tongue in cheek. But my hope is that our D line can set these edges and then watch for these plays to the flat, because that is literally where we're getting killed every single game, is these plays to the flat. And I'm not understanding. Is it, do you think it's the stunting? Do you think it's the assignment? So like the scheming, or do you think there is a slight talent discrepancy that is now kind of rearing its ugly head around this late in the season?
I don't think it's a talent thing on the defensive line. I think it's just, so we've talked about this earlier in the season when it comes to complementary football, and we usually speak to it as the defense playing to complement the offense and vice versa. But a lot of that also happens between the different units on the same side of the ball. And I think it's that the defensive line is trying to do almost a little too much to where it leaves the linebackers exposed. So if you're just trying to, in this case, they're not really trying to get upfield, but they're trying to hold a couple of gaps. One thing that goes wrong, you lose the edge, you lose contain, you lose everything. And now the team is off to the races because they're going to the sideline. And if you don't have anybody out there to stop it, your linebackers aren't going to get there in time. And look, I think we do have an issue when it comes to overall team speed. We just don't seem to have that pursuit that we
Yeah.
used to. So if you
Which
can
is
just,
very
like you
weird.
said,
It's
yeah,
almost
it's
like
very odd.
it's a very, it's, to me it's like it's a give and take season, because we're not used to being this sort of, I mean, again, going back to the 2001 team and that whole class, you we're not really, we've never really been known for being this super powered offense. We've usually had a very stout and fast defense who can get to the perimeter quick. But it seems like this is like one of those like Dr. Hyde and Jekyll years, where it's like everything's kind of flipped on its face, and we're this high powered offense and we can't seem to get to the edges. I would also like to see and wonder. It's senior day, obviously, so it's the last home game of the year. Usually, those years we like to feature a lot of seniors. Like we give them as much playing time as possible. What do you think the chances, though, are of us getting some of these freshmen, especially on the offensive side with the run game, to maybe get to the outside? Because those guys are speed guys. With Martinez aside, eh, we have some guys that are younger that can get to the outside. Despite them being freshmen, what do you think the chances are of them getting in the game? And if they do get in the game, how effective will they be?
Yeah, I think it's look, at this point in the season, Miami has to win out to keep its hopes alive of winning the ACC, making it to the ACC championship game, hopefully making the college football playoff. You can't really protect your playbook anymore. If you have, packages that you can run your personnel with and run a little bit more speed to the outside, you have to use it. Now, if you're Miami, I think the best way to use that, to utilize guys like Chris Johnson or AJ Allen, it might be running sets with two running backs. You saw a lot of that in the last couple of games with both Mark Fletcher and Damian Martinez. I think you run that with, Damian Martinez and a Chris Johnson, for example, or a Mark
Yeah.
Fletcher and AJ Allen, because you need to have at least one of those running backs back there for pass protection. That's where Miami's been its best, is in max protect with a running back blocking that extra pass rusher to give Cam Ward that extra time to, do his thing. If you want to have one do that in pass protect and the other one kind of be your outlet, your quick check down, that's kind of how I see that one going. So hopefully we see a little bit more of that this week, or they have something that's just designed running back, route, like a quick wheel route or something like that, just to get some extra space and get the ball out quickly. Cause that's something that's been missing the past few weeks. Everything's been forced 10, 15 yards down the field.
Yeah, I think we also have to make sure we can kind of reel Cam in. I think we can, if we can just get to those check down plays, because to me, there's nothing wrong with a check down play. I'll take 2 or 3 yards as opposed to an incomplete interception, or possibly injuring a player because he's getting thrown and he's getting hit across the middle. So I would really like to see Cam do that. I would like to see a little bit more running to the outside, to the flats a little bit. I would actually love to see plays that are daggers to us be daggers to the other team. You know what I mean? Like screens. I would love to see more screens. I'm not sure what it is with our O line, because there's moments of brilliance and then there's moments of like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? Like sometimes our pass coverage is great, sometimes our pass coverage is terrible. Sometimes our run blocking is great, sometimes our run blocking is terrible. How how uh how reliable do you think our O line is going to be against this Wake Forest D line?
I think the O line should be fine. It's just a matter of how exotic do the blitzes look, and how really I think it determines like what the pace of the game looks like. If Miami happens to go down early, okay, now we're in some trouble because they're trying to force the ball more, or they're trying to force the ball downfield, and that's where they're going to have an issue. In terms of how they line up now, like if you're just starting the game 0-0, Miami looks good. They should exploit every part of that Wake Forest defense. If North Carolina can do it, Miami should be able to put up, 45, 50 points. It's just we'll see what that play looks like. You were talking about the screen passes, and one thing that I would like to see more of are different types of screens. What you saw against Georgia Tech that just didn't
Good
work
point.
was that quick wide receiver screen where you throw out to like a trip set or a
Yeah.
diamond set to the sideline. And don't get me wrong, that's a good play to keep a defense honest to then open up the rest of your playbook later in the game, but you have to block it. And why those screens didn't work is because they weren't being blocked. They had, the same amount of personnel. If you had three guys out there, they had three defenders. They just the receiver is getting hit as he's catching the ball, which is a failure of executing the blocks. So you need to see that. And also, if you need to utilize a different look, you throw a tunnel screen, you throw your OG running back screen that you just don't really seem
That's
to use anymore. Like that's the
to
best way to end a pass rush is a quick running back screen.
Yeah, I feel like these last 2 games, we have to get back to basics. Just and not even for the sense of, like, because other stuff's not working. I think it's just it's a confidence booster. It's a way of kind of stretching your legs, stretching your arms to figure out, "Okay, what else do we have in our arsenal?" And to keep other teams honest. I mean, like you said, you're talking about those wide receiver screens. I mean, that those things are telegraphed, I feel like, from a mile out. Like, I feel like we're just it's like, "Hey, yes, what we're gonna do." Whereas if you get those lineman screens where you can pull a guard and a tackle either way, whether it's a left or right side, and then just dink it out there, or you keep the defense super honest, especially if they're playing man coverage, and you can hit like a Restrepo over the top. I mean, boom, you're golden. You know what I mean? And it's like I just don't see again nothing against our wide receivers, but I don't think our wide receivers bread and butter is blocking. You know what I mean? And so it's like, don't play to your strengths, you know? And so it's like, don't get cute, just do things that work. And 4 yards is 4 yards, you know? Like, I don't think we need to constantly be going over the top, constantly going for these 15+ yard plays when we could easily shoot something off to the flat for 2 or 3 yards. Let our playmakers make plays because that's the other thing I really would love to see in this game, which we didn't see too much in the Georgia Tech game, is the playmakers making plays. Let these guys catch some balls in space. Let them make a move or two and see where we go. Worst comes to worst, you get 4 yards. Best case scenario, you can get what happened like Restrepo when he broke the record where he had that like 60 or 70 yard catch. You know what I mean? I think it was like a 20 or 30 yard pass, but then he got an additional 20, 30 yards from a missed tackle, you know?
Yeah, the
Which
timing was perfect on that play.
it was. And speaking of missed tackles, in that article I was referencing earlier from the Miami Herald, what they were talking about was Miami having, I think it was anywhere between 83 to 86 missed tackles. Now, apparently that's a normal stat for any team where we're at in this season. But what they noted was that it was in particular damaging when these missed tackles were occurring for Miami. And that has been, I feel like, the theme of the season. It's not it's a we have a bend not break defense, but the problem is when the dam breaks, it is like one of these unlucky moments where it is that one tackle that we miss, you know? And so my
Yeah.
hope is that we can secure these tackles, get in the right assignment, but like again, on the defensive side and offensive side, don't get cute. No more stunting with the linemen. Just push. You have athletes, especially against Wake Forest, and I'm assuming Syracuse too next week. I mean, I'll do a little bit more homework for Syracuse. I usually just focus on the week, but looking at Wake Forest's linemen, we should be able to push them back. There should be no reason why Bain, Barron, anyone shouldn't be in that backfield. I would say at least a minimum 1.5 plays out of each drive. You know what I mean? Or each down. So we're going to have to see, but Miami absolutely needs to win to stay alive in the college football playoff for their college football player hopes to stay alive. I thought what was interesting this week was seeing some of the people who were out and some of the people who were in. So this week we lost LSU, Kansas State, Washington State, and Louisville, who all dropped big matches this week and fell out of the top 25 after major upsets. We're seeing Colorado and Coach Prime slowly sneaking up, and all of a sudden, which is very weird, everyone's pegging them to be the big 12 favorite. Like, what are you
Yep.
thinking about that? What are your thoughts on Colorado, Rudy?
I think it's not so much that it's Colorado. It's more the fact that BYU lost to Kansas. And if you look at the road that BYU has left versus the road that Colorado has left, Colorado is looking a lot better in terms of meeting up with the Cougars for the Big 12 championship. And look, once you get there, that's really what determines it. But the stock is rising for Colorado, given that BYU lost to Kansas. Is what, like they had 2 wins on the year going into that game. And granted, they
But I
always lost
told you
close, but
we talked about this last week.
we
I
sure
was like,
did.
listen, I was like, Kansas is a sneaky good team, and they've lost all their games pretty much by one possession. The
Yep.
Utah game, throw that out because again, every team gets that one game where they're just way off, and it's like a freak game. But like Kansas has lost every game by 7 or less points, one possession every time, and it's just been like, mm. And not only that, but we're going to talk about those games a little bit later on in the show. But these are teams that are kind of clicking in the second half, and they're getting hot hands. And this is the worst time if you're BYU to start getting cold.
Yep.
Tennessee also dropped to Georgia, which that was a phenomenal game. I mean, they fell to 11. I mean, which allowed Miami to move up. Notre Dame, Alabama, Ole Miss, and UGA all jumped up due to that loss. I mean, BYU, like we were just talking about, dropped 8 spots to number 14, pushing them to the 12th seed, which I thought was interesting because we're going to show I'm going to pull the graphic up right now. You can see with BYU falling now
Yeah.
to
Boise
14,
State.
that puts them out of the bye week, which I thought was
Yep.
very interesting. And it really changes the dynamic of the playoff. Now, again, what we're seeing, these are the projections. This isn't like, oh, this is what the playoff would be like. This is, again, I think another thing that ESPN and people who are watching this stuff are having a problem with is they're getting the rankings from the CFP, then they're seeing what ESPN's putting together and they're thinking they're inextricably linked, and they're not. What ESPN's basically doing is they're showing people what it would look like, you know? And so I thought, seeing we still have 4 Big 10 teams and 5 SEC teams in the mix. Rudy, if Indiana loses, are they out, or how far do they fall?
I don't think they're out. I just think, I really think the Big Ten is probably going to get 4 teams in.
Okay.
Uh, and I think they stay in. It's a matter of just they're playing Ohio State this week. Do they lose another game outside of that? If they do, I think they're out. But if that's their only loss, I think they're in.
Yeah, I don't think I realistically do not see Indiana losing another game. And they,
Yep.
after Ohio State, they play Purdue, and Purdue is horrific. So
Yep.
I realistically don't see them losing. If they do lose, I can kind of see them probably right now they're at 5. I think with the loss to Ohio State, I think even with a triple, like touchdown or 3 possession game loss, I think the lowest they'll fall is 8 spots, which would bring them to about 13.
Mm-hmm.
Might knock them out. It might not. I think if they play within 14 points, so if they lose within 14 points, I think the max they're going to fall is maybe 4 or 5 spots, putting them at 8 or 9, which would, again, like you said, put them in that 8 or 9 spot, you know what I mean, of the ranking, which again, that could end up in I'm thinking like a 9 or 10 seed, because again, there's a huge outcry of people from, I'm not sure if it's the SEC, whether it's the media, but I'm seeing just a lot of traction for this, like 5 SEC teams that are in the mix that all deserve to be in. I'm not really understanding why, because here's the thing. The CFP committee is going to have a hard time because you're going to have roughly 5 teams that are all going to end up 6-2, barring chaos. Barring chaos, I think there's going to be about 5 teams that are 6-2. What teams, if they're not allowed to take 5, who do they take, Rudy?
And from the SEC,
Yeah, from the SEC, because I think without a doubt, I think again, barring a blowout on Saturday, I think Indy's in. I think they're just gonna. I think people like their
yeah,
story. I think people are
I
gonna
agree.
just keep them in. I think they're gonna. I think the lowest they'll fall is maybe the 11th seed. They won't.
Yeah.
They'll be a road team. You know what I mean? They won't get that home. But Penn State's not going to go anywhere because they don't play anyone, and they're going to win out.
Yep.
Ohio State will, if again, they'll beat I mean, here's the thing, actually, now that we're talking this through, Ohio State, we're going to get into it when we preview the Ohio State Indy game, but Ohio State's lost this lineman. What if they lose to Michigan? Do you think there's a potential that they could lose to Michigan, win this week, but lose next week?
If they were to lose to Michigan, I think they're effectively out because they're going to possibly, I mean, look, with that loss, they get knocked out of the Big Ten championship game, don't
Oh,
they?
that's true. Yes, they would. Actually, you're right. They would.
Because then you would have to put like Penn State in their
Oh,
place.
yeah, Penn State, because the tiebreaker would go from Indy and OSU to OSU, and then, but here's the thing. Oh yeah, because Penn State would only have one loss. Yeah, I was gonna say, and
Yep.
then OSU would have two. Because it's like because
And the
OSU has
loss
a
to Michigan would
tiebreaker.
look really bad. The loss to
Yeah, the
Michigan would
loss.
look bad. It's a rivalry game. I get that. But the way Michigan's record looks this year, that's not a good loss. It's one thing to argue that you lose to Oregon. If they beat Michigan and they lose to Oregon again in the Big Ten championship game, you make the argument that you lost to the number one team in the country twice. Like you have an argument there, but you have to beat Michigan this year. It's just, I know there's a lot of hype. They just signed like the number one overall recruit in the country. That doesn't matter this season. You have to beat Michigan this year.
Yeah, to me, what I'm looking at when I see these rankings is that at first I was like, oh, all this stuff will settle out, and you'll be able to get maybe an SMU, or you'll maybe be able to get an extra team in that's in that like 11 to 15 range. But as I look at the rankings right now, even again, let's just say it real quick. Let's just preview for next week. Do you think Texas loses to A&M?
I think there's a good possibility of it. I'm going to probably be on the record next week. Let's see what this week looks like. I don't think they play anybody serious, but I think Texas loses to A&M in College Station because they already have one loss at home against Notre Dame early in the year. Shouldn't let that happen again. And, Texas has looked great. They've also looked bad in some cases. I think this is one of those games where home field advantage is going to mean something because there's so much on the line. So, yeah, if that happens, that sends a little chaos in the SEC.
So if Texas loses to A&M, right, it's final game of the season, I believe they will be knocked out of the SEC championship game, because they'll have two losses. And for whatever reason, I literally had to go to the SEC website and look up like the tiebreakers. And it says it's a this is how the SEC is going to figure out their championship game. The following procedures will be used in descending order until the tie is broken. So here's first hurdle one, head-to-head competition amongst tie teams. Fun fact, every team has beaten every team. That's out the window. Two, record versus all common conference opponents among tied teams. Now, this is going to be hard because not everyone has played the same teams. Third, record against the highest best placed common conference opponent in the conference standings. What? So this is like one of those things where you get into where you have a team like Alabama, who we all thought was completely out of the SEC championship spot, like chances, and now they're back in it. So it's like, barring chaos at this point, I mean, does Texas completely fall out of the playoff if they lose to A&M?
I don't think they should fall out of the playoff picture completely, but they are going to fall out of that SEC championship picture. And if that happens, look, I think the SEC is going to get three teams in, so they could
Oh, I think they'll
arguably
definitely.
be
I
the
think
third team.
again, tinfoil theory time, guys.
I
Tinfoil
was
theory
I was
time.
literally about to start clearing out this little bowl
Get
to
it,
do that.
get
But
it
yeah,
ready, baby, because we're
let's
gonna
get
get
the
tinfoil.
bananas out of here first.
I think
And
again,
the other banana.
barring, and I'm talking massive chaos. Like I'm talking about yeah, 2 weeks of craziness. Like it wouldn't just be next week; it'd have to be this week too somehow. I think the SEC is going to get a minimum of 4, possibly 5. Because if Texas A&M beats it again, if you look at where Texas is at number 3 right there, and if you look at the way they're falling, they are talking way too much about this cluster of Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, A&M, and who's the other team? Alabama. Like these 5 or 6 teams that are playing, there's too much talk, there's too much smoke. So I think if Texas does lose, I think the most they fall, because Texas A&M is at 15, I think the most they'll fall is maybe 4 or 5 spots. Again, it's not, and where this is going to be a problem is for a Boise State, a BYU, um, Colorado. Again, Colorado and Arizona State, who we'll talk about later in the show also, they've got to win. And then basically the Big
Yep.
12, they have to win. And then there's, of course, the Notre Dame Army game this weekend, which, again, we're going to get into. But it's like, something tells me I will not be. I first was like, four SEC teams is completely out of the question. The more I think about it, I'm like, I think there actually might be five, especially if A&M wins. If A&M wins, it's going to be very hard with Notre Dame at six and then play like their only loss being to Notre Dame essentially out of conference.
Yeah.
And the South Carolina, the SC team that they lost to is they're on fire right now. So it's like, and a lot of people respect that. So I think as crazy as it is and has been this whole season, I'm a firm believer that we're going to get probably four Big Four teams, Big Ten teams, and we're going to get five SEC teams. I hate to say that, but I think just the way people are talking and the outrage, especially with Georgia and everyone losing their mind that Georgia is as low as they are right now at 10, even though, like they have the hardest schedule. They've beaten more ranked teams than any of the top five teams put together. I don't know, man. I see a heavy SEC playoff.
It wouldn't shock me, but it would disgust me. Is really what the point is. And then it's one of those where if you watch those first round games, I want to see how many of them fall. Let's have that argument when it comes.
It's sad to me too because you have an SMU team who's really good, and what sucks is I think we're really good too, like but only one of us is getting in. And I think
Yep.
in any other year, and if there wasn't this cluster of SEC teams that are all going to probably end up going 6-2, when you're, I think SMU and us would have gotten in. In any other year, you would have two ACC teams in, but there's not enough traction for that SEC, which really pisses me off because it's this constant national narrative of the national media to constantly push these SEC teams. And to me, I get it. Like they're great teams, but like if we really want to get into the weeds, which maybe we will next week, we can get into the minutia of like conference scheduling and what does this win look like compared to this win and what specifically, because it feels like they're judging losses more than wins. What do these losses look like? I don't think the discrepancy is as big as it is being portrayed in the media between the SEC and these other conferences, specifically the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, completely different. Big 12, their chaos and craziness in itself. But we're going to have to see what happens this weekend. Hopefully our Canes can pull out so we can shut some of this stuff down. SMU continues to win. Wouldn't be nice to see a little bit of a chaos? Little maybe Notre Dame goes down this weekend. We will see. But enough about what could happen. Let's talk about what will happen. We have some week 13 previews coming up. First, I want to talk about Ohio State versus Indiana. I mean, Ohio State is on a 28-year win streak. That's insane to me. The last time they where Ohio State did an outright win was in 1990, and the last time that Indy outright won was 1988. But this could be the year. This could be the year for Coach Sig. OSU lost their center, Seth McLaughlin. It's the third O lineman that's fallen out. How impactful do you think this is going to be for this game, Rudy?
Look, a center is an important position to have. It's just a matter of what the depth looks like for Ohio State. And Indiana's had a great story. I don't know. This is one of those that we've kind of had circled on our calendar now for a few weeks. And even with the injuries, I still think Ohio State, gets the job done. But will it be closer than I think, than what the line is? I don't even know what the line is right now. It's like 7.5 for Ohio
The
State or
line,
something like that.
the line is, let me pull this up. It is actually 11 and a half points for Ohio State, which
I
is
wouldn't be surprised if it goes down to like 3 points. So I'd take the points in this one.
Oh,
I'd have, yeah.
I absolutely would too, for the pure fact that statistically on paper, the margins are razor thin. They're almost identical. Let me read to you some stats really quick because it's just like when you really look at this, it's insane. They both have had the average time of possession almost exact at 30 minutes, pretty much. I mean, the plays per game, 66 for Indiana, 64 for Ohio State. I mean, they're both scoring about 40 points a game. They're both only allowing between 10 and 15 points a game. So it's not like one's allowing 20 and one's allowing 7. Like these guys are pretty much identical statistically. One of the things I'm kind of keeping an eye out for because I love this kid. I was really heartbroken when we didn't get him, but it's like how much of an impact do you think Jeremiah Smith will be in this game?
Yeah, is he gonna be a possession receiver for Ohio State pretty much? Because I think every time they need a key third down conversion, they need a fourth down conversion, they're gonna be going his way because he's a phenomenal talent, and I think that's gonna be one of the bigger matchups of the afternoon, because as much as you wanna lean on the different running games for, Indiana to be physical and try to keep possession away from Ohio State, if you can move the chains, it doesn't really matter, and that's the best way to do it for Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, what was shocking to me when I went to go look, I mean, I because I think again, Jeremiah Smith, you see all these posts about him. He's all over social media. He's all over the media in itself. So you think he's putting up these incredible like Heisman number things, but he's only averaging about 70 yards a game. He only has 2 touchdowns since the loss to Oregon, and Ibuka, the other star wide receiver, is pretty much in the same boat with only two touchdowns, and he has actually fewer yards, only averaging about 21 yards a game. So you would think that, with not Kyle McCord, what's it, Will Howard. I just two white guys. They're both boring, and I just
Well,
get the two
and
confused.
McCord was there last year, so it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and honestly, like people say in Columbus that it's a massive upgrade. I'm failing to see it. I'm just like they look like the same Ohio State. Just like you replace Harrison with Jeremiah Smith, and you replace Kyle McCord with Will Howard. It's like I don't see the difference. But either way, they are statistically a better team this year. It's just going to be interesting to see because you're right. I think even though statistically Jeremiah Smith is not this breakout incredible star since the loss to Oregon, he's coming in on the right time in the right play. That those third down conversions, that those last second touchdowns that you need him to get, those catches that seem almost impossible. I don't know how this kid grabs some of the passes he's grabbing, over the shoulder passes. I'm just like, this is incredible. I mean, this kid's a stud. He's going to be incredible for the next 43 years or 2 years. He'll probably be out by a junior, but Indiana's allowing their opponent wide receivers to complete 62% of their pass, and they're allowing 6 yards a pass, which they're pretty good defense. And in the last 3 games, OSU's has an edge in the score margin, first downs and points allowed. So to me, it's like we're looking again, razor thin margins where one is weak, one is strong. And it's like I think it really will come down to this line of scrimmage. Can Ohio State extend drives not only through the air but through the run? Because you can only pass for so long. Because again, 6 yards a pass, well, that's great, if you get into a third and long situation, 6 yards is not going to be enough, and that's when you're going to need that run game. Who do you have in this game? Ohio State or Indiana?
I have Ohio State. It pains me to say it, but I have Ohio State.
Yeah, I was looking. What one thing I thought was with Ohio State having their 3 downed linemen and having to figure things out, I was like, okay, well, let's see what Indiana's linemen stack up. And when you look at the measurements, now again, I understand that offensive linemen are always going to naturally be bigger, right, than a defensive lineman because you want to be semi quick as a D lineman. But this is when I tell you this, while it may not sound like big numbers, when you really understand the anatomy of a human being, these actually are massive numbers. But when I tell you OSU has massive linemen, every single one of their linemen, even their backups, have at a minimum 10 pounds over every Indiana defense lineman, or it goes up to 40 pounds. A 40
Yeah.
pound difference is massive. I don't care who you're replacing on that line and what communication issues you're going to have. If they literally just say, go out and knock that guy down, when you have 40 pounds on a guy, like, I'm sorry, it's going to happen. And that's why I am picking OSU. I the talent. I mean, yeah, they have a $23 million roster. You don't pay that money to lose to Indiana again, whether Indiana is the stud team that they are, the Cinderella team they are, or not. You just don't have that. It's inexcusable. I think though it will be a very close game. But heading over to the SEC, we have Ole Miss taking on UF. Series, surprisingly, did not know this, is tied 12-12. Last meeting was in 2020 where Dan Mullen and the gang pounded the Rebels 51-35. I think Lane will be looking for revenge this year. What do you think happens in the swamp this weekend, Rudy?
Do they find lightning in a bottle again? I don't know. I mean, I feel like as a Miami homer, we have to root for Florida to make ourselves look a little bit better. And
Okay.
the only thing is, I don't see it happening. I'm taking Ole Miss.
Yeah.
You want to see UF do well in this case because you beat them so badly, but I think last week was just look. LSU is not Ole Miss. It's just simple as that. They're not the same team. They don't play the same way. They don't have the same talent. I think Ole Miss is just a better team, top to bottom, and I think they handle UF pretty easily. They limp into playing the Knowles next week and get the revenge then.
Yeah, I will actually take it from a different perspective. I actually want Ole Miss to win for this perspective. Our strength of schedule from now on out really isn't going to impact anything. The any if like there were teams, more ACC teams getting in where it was actually viable to get two or more ACC teams in, I think that's when I would cheer for UF. But at this point, we have to win and win out to get into the playoff. So I don't think strength of schedule matters. The reason why I take the Ole Miss side is for recruiting. I need Billy to look terrible. I need him to look absolutely atrocious, like he doesn't know what he's doing. I need DJ Lagway to literally break his leg. Not only just like screw his hamstring, I need his whole leg taken off. I need these monsters that are on this Ole Miss defense to just pummel this team because I think from a recruiting standpoint, it will look better if I mean because Florida is probably going to be bowl eligible because I mean barring a miracle, I don't see Florida State beating Florida. So ideally, I would hate to see UF become bowl eligible beating Ole Miss, but not only beating Ole Miss, beating Lane Kiffin, because that is going to be the storyline. Because we were talking about earlier in the year, what happens if Billy gets fired? Is it going to be Lane's job? Then they quickly give the vote of confidence to Billy, which we both thought was Billy saying, I mean, not Billy, was Lane saying, no, thanks, I'm going to stay here in Oxford. Because why wouldn't you just take that job? But I think he's smart and he knows he's got the run of the ship or the sip, your favorite, um, in Oxford. So why would he want to leave? But I mean, again, just like our game and like many other games this week, this is a one-sided match. Ole Miss has a better completion percentage, third down conversion, holding opponents' yards, holding opponents' red zone scoring, and holding opponents' third down conversion percentage. Like when I tell you this was just like looking at ours, I was just like, wow. And I mean, I know UF is bad, but like they've kind of been gaining steam a little bit, but it just both defensively and offensively, statistically, Ole Miss is the better team. In the last three games, which has been UF's best looking games, Ole Miss is outpacing UF in yards 490 to 298, almost 200 yards more. And they're allowing less than 100 yards compared to UF's defense. So like again, Ole Miss is just they're too good. I think the only way UF can pull this out, it is their bread and butter, explosive plays. If DJ Lagway can get his wide receivers down the field, shoot a couple daggers. I thought what was crazy, I was reading a statistic. UF only had like 40 something plays compared to LSU's 95 plays in the last game. Double. LSU had double the amount of plays, still lost the game. Brian Kelly sucks. I don't know how you can have twice as many plays, still lose a game. Beyond me. But again, I think that goes to Florida's explosiveness. And I don't think it's going to be a close game. And I think the only way Florida can keep it close and possibly win is if they get these crazy explosive plays. Heading over and out west, we're gonna go to the big prime show. A familiar foe are taking their shots at each other. It's the first time Colorado and Kansas will be playing since Colorado left the Big 12 in 2010. Kansas won that game 52 to 45. All time, Colorado leads the series 42 to 23. Both teams are clicking right now, which has been incredible to see in the second half of the season. Of the six losses, like I was mentioning earlier in the show, Kansas has lost all of them by only one possession. How does this game come down, Rudy? What do you think is going to be the key to this game?
I think it's going to be twofold. It's Travis Hunter trying to do his thing defensively. They're not going to really give him too many chances to throw interceptions because they're going to
Mhm.
be or to catch interceptions. They'll be running the ball primarily. They're going to use that same formula that beat BYU. I just look at this as Shador Sanders in that offense. How much can they click? How much can they hold the ball? How much can they move? Against Kansas, I think they'll do it pretty effectively. And this might be the first game of the year that Kansas loses by multiple possessions this year. I think Colorado is just clicking that much, and they have this path in front of them. They have everything to play for. I think they come out inspired, and they do that because look, this is their last chance. One, Shador Sanders is likely projected to go to the New York Giants in the draft. Poor kid. Good luck. And I don't know what you think about these rumors of Deion Sanders possibly being considered for the Cowboys. This might be the last dance for Colorado.
Yeah, if Shador ends up you said Shador, right? Or did you say Travis will go to the Giants?
Shador Sanders.
Yeah, see, I think the only way Dion leaves for the NFL is if Shador goes to the Cowboys. Like if the Cowboys say they're going to trade up or they're going to try and get Shador, I think that's the only way he leaves for the NFL, especially after signing. I mean, we could have talked about this number 2 recruit, Juju, whatever his name is, out of
Yeah, the quarterback.
California, the number 1 or number 2 quarterback in recruiting. Again, and Prime even said, he's like, I want to play freshman. So it's not like this kid's going to come and sit and they're going to get someone out of the portal. Like, I think he's going to put all his eggs in this basket. Um, I actually have a different view of this. I will skip to the end, say Colorado, I think will win. But I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people think. Offensively, Kansas holds a slight edge. When you look at the statistics, they hold a slight edge in almost every category. Conversely, though, Colorado actually holds a slight edge on the defense. So it's going to be this complementary battle between the two sides. Kansas has a better third down conversion rate at 49%, a better red zone scoring percentage at 96%. Where I think it will be interesting is Colorado allowing about the same amount of points per game as Kansas is averaging. So that's where I always like to look at those two things. It's like how much is a defense allowing, and then how much is that opposing team on average scoring. When they're linked up in the same thing, kind of like we were talking about the Wake Forest thing, I think that kind of shows that the offense will probably be clicking and there probably won't be an issue, which is where we have to kind of get into the defense. Kansas is only allowing 27. Colorado is averaging about 38. So if the Kansas defense can hold up, I think they may win. I think another facet was like what you were talking about is how does Travis Hunter play? Other than the Cincinnati and the Texas Tech games, he has been a very mid and average player. I mean, everyone thinks I'm crazy when I say this, but he's only averaging 11 yards of reception or less per game, and he only has 3 touchdowns. Like, I get it. Like he plays both sides of the ball. But if I was to tell you that about Xavier Restrepo, you would laugh at me. If I told you, hey, like Xavier Restrepo is averaging 11 yards and he only has 3 touchdowns in the last 6 games, you'd be like, that's a very mid wide receiver. I don't think that's good. His longest reception has only been 34 yards in the last 5 games. I think everyone's keeping an eye on Travis. I think where the crucial part for Shador will be, because they're also down their other star wide receiver Horn Jr. I think it's going to be these two guys, Wester and Shepard. If they can
Yeah.
get those guys open, because those guys have like over 300 yards also so far this season, I think that will be a crucial part of Colorado's offensive scheme. But more importantly, this is the most important stat for Colorado. They need to keep Shador on his feet. Shador's been on his butt 6 times in the last 2 games. 15 sacks in the last 5 games. That's an average of 3. If you do the math, that's an average of 3 sacks a game. That's a lot in my opinion, that's a lot of sacks for a quarterback who is basically their offense. You know what I mean? And the sack percentage is the same for the Kansas D line as it is for the Colorado's O line. So basically, when you look at it statistically, what Kansas is averaging in sacks is what Colorado is allowing on their offensive side. And that is just like we were talking about points. That's the inverse for bad news bears for the Buffs. So I think it'll be a very close game, much closer than what anyone's going to think say it is. And I think the only way Colorado wins is if they can shut down Kansas's offense. Like Colorado's defense has to show up. It can't be a high scoring game. And or if it is, like it's going to be like us. They're just going to have to outscore them, because I think if it's a low scoring game, I think Kansas pulls this out. That's realistically where I
Hmm.
go. Yeah. Heading over to the other side, we've got a team going from last to first. I mean, as a team picked dead last in their conference to controlling their own destiny, Arizona State came out of left field in the Big 12. No one saw this coming. I don't think anyone did. But how did the Sun Devils, Rudy, keep their conference dreams alive this weekend against BYU?
They have to fall back to their boo. And when I say that, I mean Scattaboo, the running back, because
Scott, I love his name.
He's been fantastic to watch. I mean, even if
Yeah,
you
he's
looked at
been
him earlier
incredible.
on in the season, he's an absolute stud, and he just keeps getting better as the game goes on. And that's how I think they beat BYU this weekend.
Yeah,
I really do. Like they play a similar game style to Kansas. I think they're going to win that game outright.
yeah, spoiler, I think Arizona State's gonna win as well. Statistically, there are razor thin margins in this game as well. I mean, I like to look at statistics mainly for the pure fact that, like, I don't get to see all these games. I don't get to watch every game in depth. So when you get to see these numbers, you can kind of get a better gist of it. But like both teams are averaging about 30 points per game. The average margin of victory is between 8 and 10 points for both teams. They have the same average yards per game, 383 to 399. I mean, it's 10 yards, like less than that. And they're both at the same time of possession, 31 minutes. Like when I tell you it's almost verbatim the same thing, it's wild to me, especially considering the fact what Arizona State looked like at the beginning of the season. The third down conversion is pretty bad for BYU though. They're only converting about 30% of their third downs, whereas ASU is converting about 47. So they're more of like a 50-50 team. BYU does have the red zone scoring advantage though, with a 90% versus Arizona State's, which is about 80. Both defenses are allowing around 21 points per game and giving opponents about 28 minutes in possession time. So it's not like there's like this, like, oh, like one team is just controlling the ball, kind of like what Georgia Tech did to us last game. I think right now, the reason why I'm picking, despite the razor thin margins, is I'm going to go with the hot team, and pun intended, the Sun Devils. I'm going to go with them because ASU in the last three games has just had a better scoring margin of 12 versus 3. I mean, they're scoring more points also, 34 versus 24. I mean, it's when you've got, this is a game of momentum, college football specifically. The NFL is a little different, but college football, it's when you see the momentum riding like this, it's, you got to go with the hot hand. And to me, Arizona State is there, I think, being in control of your destiny, going literally from last to first. But not only that, with the sanctions they've had on them this year, looking as bad as they did at the beginning of this year, to now being in control of their destiny to play possibly Colorado, who no one thought these two teams were going to be in the Big 12 championship. It's a story that writes itself. I think it's a beautiful thing. And I hope Arizona State wins, not just because it's not, I have nothing against BYU. It's just the BYU, I think, has just, and I know this is going to sound like a shot to us, but they've kind of looked a little bit like us, like They're not as consistent in their games. They either get behind, or they play very close to teams they shouldn't be playing close to, i.e. UCF, until they pulled away towards the end. But that Utah game, they should have lost that Utah game. Losing to Kansas last week, again, yes, Kansas is a good team, but I still think BYU was the better team, both talent wise and statistically, but they lost. And I think this is just like them, like stumbling, and that's what they're going to do. I firmly believe Arizona State will win, and we're going to have chaos, more chaos going in.
With all that momentum too, the one thing that I think I can add to that is Arizona State's the home team. And when you have all
Mhm.
of that going your way, and then you're also the home team, I mean, BYU's best performance arguably was at home, where they, had defensive scores, special team scores, offensive scores. You're not really seeing that. It's almost like the wheels are kind of falling off after that one loss, especially because now they're going back on the road to play, consecutive weeks. It's a little different from Miami situation, who lost on the road, have a bye week, and now get to play a middling team at home. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think everything points Sun Devils way. And if the Mormons are getting a little distracted, all those future adult film stars over in Tempe probably provide a really good distraction if they're looking to the sideline for calls.
Is ASU still the number one party school in America? It was when
Oh,
we were
I'm
in
sure they're
college.
up there.
Yeah, they've got to be, and then they will probably be partying a lot this weekend should they beat BYU. Now our last game of the week will be Army versus Notre Dame. It is the last test for Notre Dame. I really thought, this was going to be a 1-2, like, oh my God, here we go. This is going to be a battle of the juggernauts, but I'm scarred from the Navy game. Navy let me down. And like Navy, Army runs a variation of the triple option, and that did nothing to Notre Dame. Notre Dame just like wiped their nose with the triple option. They were like, get out of there. Army is unbeaten, but they are a 14-point underdog. The game is at Yankee Stadium. How do you think this plays out?
I also have PTSD from the Navy game. I picked Navy to beat Notre Dame in that
Me
one.
too.
I really
I
wanted to see that, and it went the polar opposite direction. I think you're going to see some of the same because one insider, piece that we remember is that as bad as the Al Golden era was at Miami, he had a really good record against Paul Johnson and Georgia Tech and defending triple option, offenses. Granted, they throw the ball a little bit more now than they used to. Instead of throwing it like twice a
Yeah.
game, they're throwing it like 8, 9, 10 times. But I think they just have they're too strong at the defensive line. The front seven, for example, is just that's where you beat a triple option, and that's Notre Dame's strength historically. I don't think it's close.
Well,
Yeah, you'll get like it's cool that they're doing like the pinstripe series thing for Notre Dame playing that one game a year over in New York. And you
right.
have it's really close to West Point because that's upstate New York, so you'll have a good contingency of Army and West Point. But yeah, this is sadly to say probably a cakewalk for the Irish.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting, I didn't know this, but so the issue that Army always has, and this is any of the service academies, but since we're talking about Army, we'll just use them in particular. So apparently, I didn't know this, but the service academies cannot take a player above a certain size and like body like density. Like if they're
Yep.
too big, like your normal like corn fed boys from like Iowa, like they can't take those guys because they have to
They got to
have
go
like a
through
certain,
basic training.
yeah, they got to go to the basic, and more importantly, I mean, just to kind of make it simple, they got to be able to fit into a Humvee. You know what I mean? It's hard to get a 330-pound dude into a Humvee, or let alone over a hurdle that's probably 10 yards high. So it's like, I always wondered, I'm like, why? I mean, I feel like, our army, our military is the strongest in the world. These service academies should have no issue getting athletes. And sure enough, yeah, I mean, when you can't get a lineman who weighs more than like 240 pounds, yeah, that's going to be kind of hard to push. And it actually surprised me because when you think when you have that kind of like like restrictions on who you can recruit, I would think you would play a different style of offense. I would think you would play maybe more of a spread air raid because you'd have to have leaner people. You would need linemen who are faster and able to get out. You know what I mean, for that spread. But I thought that was like a very like I was like, oh, that kind of does make sense too. I mean, the Army defense is giving up 10 points per game. They're the number 2 scoring defense in the country, so they are actually competitive. I think the only ones rooting for Army this weekend and hoping Army wins are SEC fans and true patriots, who want to see America first. Because again, who wants to cheer for the Fighting Irish? No one. Everyone
No.
hates them. No one likes them. But I will say this: Notre Dame's offense is averaging 38 points a game. They're
Yeah,
good.
it's
They're
and you were mentioning too about that recruiting restrictions that they have. It's also there's also a separate factor that has been like the Aflac trivia question every time Clemson plays. What are the 4 schools that don't accept players in the transfer portal? It's the 3 service academies: Army, Navy, Air Force, and Clemson. So
and
they don't
Clemson.
go
Yep.
after players because they're a service academy, and you got to do more than just play football when you're there. But yeah, the offensive system makes sense because it's all about discipline. It's all about timing, repetition, and it's a
Yeah.
scheme that if you're not fundamentally sound, it's going to exploit you and it's going to expose you. So that's where they have success. It's just a matter of doing it over and over and over and over again. Think of like the Fighting 300 and the Spartans.
Yeah.
You may not have the size, but if you're all moving in one direction in tandem, it's hard to defend. So
Yeah. I have
uh,
Notre Dame. Notre Dame big. I
yeah,
hope it's close.
sadly.
I would love to see chaos because that would be incredible for next week's show. That would be incredible for the playoffs, and the playoff talks because then Notre Dame's basically out. But again, don't see it happening. But this will be a challenge for Notre Dame in the sense of mentally. I think they have to just stay tight. They have to stay focused, not look ahead to USC, their final game, and put this team away quick and in a hurry. You know. Well, Rudy, we have made it another one in the books. We are drawing to a close of this season. I'm getting a little sad, but I think we're going to have some fun stuff in the off season. But just want to thank you guys for watching. Until next week,